When it comes to Batman, a lot of his saddest moments revolve around some of his biggest regrets. Like many heroes who came after, Bruce Wayne takes any of his failings very hard, and it's likely why he works and trains so hard to be just that much better, just that much closer to perfection. With every mistake comes some tragedy, but also, hopefully, some knowledge of how to guard himself and those he loves against a similar result coming to pass in the future. It is Batman's sadness and tragic history that has shaped him into the character that he is today. Join me as we relive some of these evolutionary moments for the hero and count down the top 10 saddest things that happened to Batman. Get ready to tear up some because, even seemingly stoic heroes like Batman cry. And let's get into it. Number 10, confronts Joe Chill. Honestly, a moment that really tugged at my heartstrings came from three Jokers and Batman's confrontation of Joe Chill there. Batman has confronted Chill more than once in the comics, and usually many of those times involve him losing his temper to some extent and getting swept up in his own mourning. Joe Chill is also usually represented as being unremorseful, swearing he'd do it again if he had the chance, or simply completely ignorant of what he'd done, so hardened of a criminal is he. In Three Jokers, however, he's painted as a sick, elderly man who has many regrets in life. He learned more about the Waynes during his time in prison and their public work, and he came to regret his actions because of this. The Joker kidnaps Joe Chill, threatening to turn him into the next Joker, but Batman saves him, even though Joe Chill claims he doesn't deserve it. At one point, falling bricks actually threatened to crush Chill, meaning he couldn't become the next Joker, and Batman would actually finally be rid of him if he just let that happen. And yet, Batman chooses to save him anyway. This event shows that Batman has chosen to forgive Chill in a way and move forward with his life. And it's Batman's ability to heal that inspires a tear after knowing how long the death of his parents has loomed over him. What's even crazier in that story is that technically Joker helped Batman to heal just so he could be an even more iconic Batman villain, which is a pretty next level obsession. Number 9, almost wiped his memory. Almost. Batman has gotten amnesia a few times in the comics, in the animated series as well, but he always seems to recover and find his way home. At one point though, he almost decided to permanently sever that connection to his home and his past. He hired someone to impersonate Alfred so they could sign his papers requesting electroshock therapy to help him basically forget his parents' death and his own tragic past. He was committed to this and on the table, but just as they were about to administer the shock, he decided he could not go through with it. Instead, he used his own tragedy to inspire him, to make something grow out of it, becoming the Batman. Honestly, this is a pretty good moral too when you think about it. And honestly, I'm glad he did because it's a pretty good moral to take your own tragedy and then repurpose it into something constructive. This little moment in his history is also perfectly told as a part of a narrative where he has to accept a shock of 1,000 volts in order to defeat the Riddler and keep the lights on in Gotham. At first, it seems as though Batman won't survive as a result, flatlining afterward. But fortunately, Alfred shows up to save the day, promising to always be there to patch Batman up. Aww. Later, Bruce confesses to Alfred what he almost went through years before. And friends, before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder, if you love this list and you want more Batman lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, his connection to Joe Chill. Talk about dramatic reveals that really make you revel in Batman's tragic origins. This reveal comes to us from the 60s where it showed up in Batman issue 208. Here we learned that Bruce's uncle Phillips became his guardian following the death of his parents. Philip, however, traveled quite a bit. He would often leave Bruce in the care of his housekeeper, Mrs. Chilton. Mrs. Chilton helped to raise Bruce and was excited at the opportunity as she had 2 sons previously, but they were all grown up now. She later looks back on her time with Bruce and is proud of the man he's become. She even figured out that he was really Batman. But what she also reveals is that one of her own 2 sons was named Joe, and that he changed his last name to Chill. A secret, she says, that Bruce must never know. Dun dun dun. Pretty sad that he was raised by the woman who also raised Joe Chill. Number 7, losing to Bane. This was a very epic loss and one that Batman would never forget. It wasn't just a sad moment for Bruce either, but a sad moment for comic book readers around the world. When Bane broke Batman's back in Nightfall, it put Batman out of commission for all of us. And most people that break their backs don't just bounce back from that. So this setback left some fans wondering if we'd ever see Bruce take up the cowl again. Bruce focused on recovering and would eventually return, with Azrael taking up the mantle for him during his time away from Gotham. But he'd likely come to regret this choice after he saw what Azrael did while wearing the name upon his return. Number 6. Death of his fiancee. This one was really tragic because it seemed as though Bruce might finally be learning to loosen up and drop his guard down a little bit. And then this happened. For a while, it seemed as though, against all odds, Batman might actually settle down and even, I dare say, retire, with the return of his old flame, Silver St. Cloud. Silver was like many other potential love interests before her, a socialite, putting her on a pretty close level to Bruce in terms of her everyday life and her status. Silver had originally left Bruce because she learned of his true identity as Batman and basically couldn't deal with it. Riddled with worry for Bruce, she left him and left Gotham. However, years later, she would return to Gotham, and the two fell back in love and decided to pick up where they'd left off. Their newly rediscovered love for one another inspired Bruce to propose, and Silver said yes. Unfortunately, Batman villain Automatopoeia had inserted himself into Batman's life, posing as an ally and a friend, reinventing himself as a new hero who called himself Baphomet. Bruce considered Baphomet to be someone who could potentially help to take his place when he retired. He even brought Baphomet into the Batcave, not knowing that it was actually Automatopoeia in disguise, and introduced him to his fiancée, Silver. It was then that Automatopoeia revealed his true villainous intentions, taking Silver's life. Number 5. Catwoman left him. And at the altar, no less. Oh my goodness. This wasn't just sad for Batman, it was sad for all of us who were pumped about this wedding. Finally, Batman and Catwoman were prepared to tie the knot after years and years of comic book history and romantic history together. This was the event we had been waiting years for as comic book fans. Admittedly, the two have been married before in the comics, but these stories are generally relegated to alternate Earths, or like non-canon stories. This time it would be happening for real in the main continuity. But right before the wedding, Catwoman seemed to get cold feet after Selina had a few discussions and self-doubt was planted in her mind about the wedding, and it became so strong that she just couldn't ignore it. So she left Bruce at the altar with a letter explaining why she didn't. Of course, this was all revealed to be a major villainous plot orchestrated in part by Bane. So sadly, no happy ending for Batman or Catwoman. I feel like we're still all waiting for them to get married. We're like, come on, let it happen. Number 4, the return of Jason Todd. What could be sadder than Jason Todd's death and Batman's failure to save him? Why, his return, of course. Jason Todd was one of those characters you expected to stay dead, like Uncle Ben. We never expected to see him return, and yet years later, he did just that. But this Jason Todd was a bit different, and we later learned that he had become a villain going by the name of Red Hood, who blamed everyone, Batman especially, for not being there for him when he needed them the most. Of course, this only twisted the knife in Batman's gut a little more. Losing Jason had already been one of the hardest moments of his life, and one that he had already blamed himself for many times over. So it was pretty heartbreaking to see Jason come back and be so, like, I don't know, vindictive, even though I know Jason Todd has kind of always been that way. Number 3, death of Damian Wayne. Batman has lost a lot of Robins over the years, and a lot of adopted sons, but Damian Wayne was his natural heir. Well, I mean, natural-ish. As natural as it gets, in my opinion, until we get a Helena Wayne in the main continuity. Damian was the son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul. He was raised by Talia and the League of Assassins without Batman really even knowing of his existence, until years later when Talia dropped him off on Bruce's doorstep, declaring Damian his son. Surprise! Initially, the two did not get along very well. Damian was stubborn in his ways and insisted on killing as he'd been trained to do his whole life. But eventually, he came around and began to see the value of his father's approach to fighting crime, respecting it, and even admiring it. Just as their relationship begins to shift, though, Damian is killed by the Heretic, a death that Batman can't even bring himself to avenge when he realizes that the Heretic is actually Damian's clone. Following Damian's death, we also got Volume 2 of Batman's Issue 18, an issue that focuses on the mourning of Damian's passing and is completely wordless throughout its sorrow-filled pages. Number 2, death of Thomas and Martha Wayne. One of the worst things to have happened to Bruce Wayne would have to be the death of his parents. He was only a child when this happened, and he happened to be with them that fateful night, even witnessing their gruesome murder. While it has been implied recently in the comics that Bruce sought out therapy to actually deal with this traumatic event, it is also what inspired him to fight back against crime as Batman, providing a kind of different type of therapy. The interesting thing is that while this is likely what would come up for Bruce if you asked him about the saddest or tragic moments of his life, without this event, he likely wouldn't be the hero that he is today. today. In fact, I suspect that we would have not gotten a Batman in the world if not for this grisly murder and most devastating moment. Number 1, death of Alfred. What could possibly be sadder than the death of young Bruce's parents? Well, how about the death of adult Bruce's father figure, butler, and confidant, Alfred? I don't think it gets much sadder than this. While the death of Batman's parents is tragic, Alfred was there to help pick up the pieces and in essence help to raise the boy before his parents passed, and of course, thereafter. He was probably one of the closest people to Batman and was more apparent to Bruce in the end than even his parents were able to be, because, they've been dead for most of his life. Alfred was shockingly killed by Bane after he'd kidnapped him when Damian Wayne didn't take his threat seriously and set out to save Alfred. It was because of his pursuit of Bane that Alfred was killed by the villain, and this was all a part of Bane's plan to break Batman again, but this time focusing more on breaking him mentally and psychologically. What do you think are some of the saddest moments that Batman has ever had? Who do you think Batman mourns the most? Do you think Bruce Wayne would still be a hero without all these tragic moments to help inspire him? Let us know in the comments below. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host, Amanda McKnight, reminding you, as always, to stay nerdy, YouTube. Actually, I think it's Mrs. Chilton. Mrs. I never know how to say Miss and Mrs. Fun fact. That is something I never got as a kid and I still struggle with.